You must dampen your pigs. This is incredibly important. You have to apply some sort of water or moisture to the place where you're going to apply the stunning wand. In some cases, you'll see that wands will be equipped with sponges on them. As an example, the stunning tongs that I have over here, they have sponges on them. And so the way that device was designed is that you could wet that sponge and then apply that to the pig, and that would help to make contact. The other thing you can do too is spray over the pigs shortly before they're going to come into the restrainer. You want them damp so you make good electrical contact. If you try to stun a dry pig, what's going to happen is you're going to have a major increase in resistance in that electrical circuit. It's going to take more power to push across the brain. And in some cases, you may not get enough amperage flowing through that circuit to actually stun the pig. So dampening the pig is very important. The next thing is we have to make sure we're using correct voltage and amperage. Amperage is what will kill the animal. My target, as a rule of thumb, when I'm setting up stunners for swine, is that usually I want to be somewhere close to 2 amps of current, somewhere in that neighborhood. From a research standpoint, it's been shown that you could use amperages that are considerably lower than that, closer to like 1.5, 1.2 amps. But I'll tell you that that 2 amp target tends to work out pretty nicely. We want to measure that regularly, and I'll show you guys how to measure the performance of your stunner in just a little bit. And then the next thing is restraint. So as far as restraint goes for electric stunning, the pig should not have the ability to run away from you when you're trying to do an electric stun. In the best case scenario, the pig should not be able to fall away from the stunning wand too. This is really important when you're using a fork type stunner, like this one right here. Can you guys imagine if you're just walking around in a pen full of pigs and you're going to apply this stunner to a pig, how there's nothing that clamps onto that pig, and how there's a pretty good risk that that animal's going to fall away from the stunning wand or might move when you apply the stunning wand, and then you run into problems. So that's why if you're going to floor stun with electric stunning, a set of tongs like this are a really good option because you can clamp them onto the pig and then you will stay with the pig. You clamp them on and you've got something physical that you can hold on to the pig with. So these are a really good option if the only restraint that you're going to allow is to keep the pig from moving around very much.
You could hold a pig with that.
What's that?
You could hold a pig, but it's free with that.
So that's a good question. So he said, so you're going to hold a pig, but it's free with this. I don't recommend that. Here's what I recommend is that you give, or that you, at least with these tongs, have the pig confined to the extent that the pig can't move around very much. So you have an individual stall you can get that pig into, at a minimum. Best case scenario, you get that pig's feet off the floor just a little bit, using some sort of restrainer. That really helps, because then you don't have to worry about the pig moving around very much, and you can just focus on getting the appropriate stun. So remember, you don't want the pig to fall away from the stunning wand. This is incredibly important. After you stun, if you're doing a head-only stun, your stun to stick interval should not exceed 15 seconds, and you better have a really good stick if you're using head-only stunning. If your hoist is too slow, and in most cases it's going to be in small and very small plants, use that 2-stage stun that I told you guys about. As far as getting a good stick goes, training somebody to stick is nearly just as important as training them to effectively stun. The way that I train people to stick is I will show them first. I'll demonstrate in front of them, and then it's not a case where I show them on a few pigs and say, okay, here you go ahead. Because there are some landmarks there. You're trying to put your knife into a very narrow space because you're trying to go between the first 2 ribs. So what I usually do is I'll have a trainee place their knife into that stick wound after we've got that pig off onto some sort of cart or cradle or whatever. Sometimes we'll even do it on the rail. I have them just take a sterilized knife, put it up in the stick wound so they can feel a little bit. So they get a feel for what it's going to be like when they put their knife into the pig. Then after they're really comfortable with it, the next step we'll take is I'll make sure I've got a pig that's received a 2-stage stun, because that typically will kill the pig. and then we let them stick. You should have a stick wound that's at least 1 inch in length. I like about a 2-inch stick wound. They bleed really nice that way. You want to have a very rapid stream of blood that comes from the pig when you stick. This is an example of a good stick. You can see the blood pouring out like this. That's what you want to see. If it's just dribbling, you need to get another stick in right away. So remember, with stun to stick interval, head only, you've got 15 seconds. With head to side or back or that head heart method, it's usually permanent because you're stopping the heart. Well, you're stopping the rhythmic beating of the heart. You put the pig into a state of what's called cardiac fibrillation, and that's where the big chambers of the heart, the ventricles, just quiver. They can't get organized again to pump rhythmically like they should. After you stun, you got to check for signs of consciousness. In the case of mechanically stunned animals, captive bolt and firearm, check for a corneal reflex. That's the first step. I always check that. I'll check that before I let an animal out of the stun box because it's quick and easy. All you do is quickly poke an eye. If the animal's still in the stun box and you happen to get a corneal reflex, shoot him again. Don't think twice, just take another shot. In the case of animals that are electrically stunned, look for rhythmic breathing. Look for cases where the animal is looking around, where they're blinking normally. Not like quivering, and sometimes the eyelid quivers a little bit, but I mean like normal blinking, like if they're standing out in the pens and looking around. And in some cases, you can check for a heartbeat too. It's not very common that people are going to keep a stethoscope with them on the kill floor, and so that's typically not a common thing that we'll look for. However, if you're trying to troubleshoot issues and you're concerned if your animal might actually be might be returning to consciousness or not, that's one of those things you could get a hold of and you can check for. If you observe any of those signs though, don't think twice about it. Don't balk at it and say, oh, I don't know, maybe this animal is okay. Just shoot again. You're just erring on the side of caution. One thing you want to do though in this case is you want to talk with your inspection personnel so that they understand how you might call it if you have to do a backup stun on an animal. A lot of plants are going to call out security knock or something like that before they apply a second stun. If your inspector wants to have a closer look, demonstrate in the case of captive bolt or firearm stunning with a corneal reflex check. So if you're just uneasy about it, you think, you know what, this wasn't my best stun, but you have no corneal reflex, show them and then stun again. As long as that first stun was effective, you're okay. Any questions at this point? Okay, remember, the first stun has got to be effective. That's the key to this. All right, so we've covered the basics of stunning, both mechanical and electrical stunning. The next thing I want to do is walk through basic stunner maintenance. I'll talk about captive bolt devices. We'll do a quick demo on how to measure the output of electric stunners. So as far as captive bolt guns go, daily on operating days, these guns need to be wiped down and oiled with gun oil. In the case of the Shermer stunners, they have cartridge plates in them. Those cartridge plates have little holes, and sometimes those holes can fill with carbon deposits, so you want to make sure you clean those up. Every time you use that gun, every time that bolt enters an animal's head, you need to open that stunner up at the end of the day, and that bolt has got to be cleaned. I'll give you guys an example. Shortly after I started working at my university, we got a captive bolt stunning set to use for euthanizing large animals. So we use it on cattle, sheep, pigs, horses, all species on our farm. And I had failed to train our farm manager on how to appropriately recondition that tool after he used it. And so he used it to euthanize a sow. And then we didn't need it for a couple of months after that. And in the meantime, I went to get it for a class. I picked it up for my class to do a demo, and I pulled like the bolt out of the kit, and it's just covered with surface rust. And so then in that case, I had to scrub to try to get that rust off, but there's still pitting on that bolt. That pitting will form over time as those devices get older, but you want to maintain these things because they're expensive. So when you're cleaning the device up, I'll get to this in just a second, you want to make sure that you do not use abrasive tools on the bolt itself. that can change the bolt diameter and impact how the bolt will perform. But remember, that bolt has got to come out of the gun. It has to be cleaned after each time that bolt is fired into an animal, or after each day of firing that bolt into an animal's head. If the gun becomes wet or soiled, you need to tear it down right away, clean it up. Now, when I mean tear down, I don't mean tear the trigger mechanism apart. There are a lot of tiny pieces in there. If you decide, I'm going to really clean this thing from top to bottom, and you tear your trigger mechanism apart, you're not going to be very happy. Leave that together unless it starts to feel sticky. And then in that case, contact the equipment manufacturer on that one. Or take it to a gunsmith. I do not recommend that you tear it down yourself. So you'll tear the device apart, remove the breech, take the bolt off, and then you'll remove the buffers. As far as maintenance items go, in most of these captive bolt stunners, the big thing is to clean the gun up, apply a light coat of oil. You want to use some sort of solvent, usually like a gun cleaning solvent when you clean these up. Don't use WD-40 to lubricate one of these guns. WD-40 will actually form sort of a sticky, sort of varnishy residue over time. And then as far as the buffers go, the buffers are the little rubber rings inside. Some of these guns have more than others. Like in the cash guns, they have a set of sometimes up to 9 buffers that are stacked up. They're really soft. In the case of the Koch 25 Magnum, they've got 2 reds and a black. You want to make sure that they're not cracked. That's the important thing here. If they start to become dried out looking and cracked, order some new ones. They're really cheap. The reason we need those buffers, actually there are 2 reasons we need those buffers. One is they are what makes that bolt bounce back into the gun after you fire it. So if you start to run into problems with your bolts sticking in the heads of animals and you haven't maintained that gun in quite some time, it could be because your buffers are bad. The second thing is that they cushion the blow of that bolt against the end of the barrel every time that you shoot. That can damage your bolt if you don't have that cushioning at the end of the barrel. So those buffers are very, very important for the life of that gun. So when we're cleaning the device, we want to wire brush the inside of the barrel to remove carbon and debris. Keep it dry. There's no reason to oil that. There are a few plants that I've gone into where the maintenance team thinks they're doing everybody a favor by greasing the bolt on the gun. So I've gone into plants and I've seen like white grease coming out the end of the gun because they grease the bolt thinking it'll slide faster. Do you guys know what happens to grease when you burn it? It leaves a lot of residue behind. You do not ever want to grease the bolt in a captive bolt. Ever, ever, ever. Clean up the bolt with some sort of scrubber pad or terry cloth. Do not use emery cloth or rotating wire wheels or wire brushes or sandpaper because they will take some of the material off of the bolt, and so that'll change how that bolt actually stays in the gun. Over years and years and years, you can actually start to trim enough of the material off the bolt where it'll fall down in the gun before you actually fire. Some of you guys have probably seen this before. Like one test that I do for captive bolt guns to see how well they're maintained is I'll grab them, unload it, and swing them down like this. You guys know what happens to the bolt in a gun that hasn't been well maintained? Or the bolt in a gun that hasn't been well maintained? It slides out the barrel. So that tells us that we need to update our spring and our retainer ball at the end of the barrel to help to hold the bolt in. We also need to closely inspect that bolt because it may be smaller in diameter. We'll inspect the buffers as well, replace them if they're cracked or damaged, but do not ever oil or grease the barrel. I cannot say that enough. As far as ordering parts and cartridges goes, here are some contacts for people that can help you to get the parts and cartridges that you need. Chuck Bildstein at Bunzel Koch is an incredible resource when it comes to servicing nearly any make of captive bolt device. So the contact information for Bunzel is on this slide. If you don't have it already, they're a good group to turn to for help on these stunners. As far as firearms go, firearms are a little bit different than captive bolt devices because we don't necessarily have to tear them down every time we use them. Because we don't have a piece that's going to be immersed into the tissue of the animal that could end up rusting. And so generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, here's what I do with guns. If I'm using a gun as my primary stunning tool, and I'm slaughtering between 1 and 20 head a week, I'm gonna clean that gun once a month. At a minimum, once a month. Just get a standard gun cleaning kit and work through the process on it. Of course, you wanna make sure it stays oiled so it doesn't get rusty on you. 40 to 80 head a week, service it weekly. More than 80 head a week, service it daily. Generally speaking, this will work out okay for you. In all cases though, keep that device away from dirt and moisture. It's one of the worst enemies of guns in general.
What size was that gun?
What's that?
What size was that gun?
This one right here?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I know.
I'm not sure. It's just for demonstration purposes. So the big thing I was emphasizing was cleaning. I have no idea what caliber that one is. Yeah.
Go back to the picture of the Shermer gun.
Yeah, sure.
Now, when we used to clean our Shermer gun, we'd take off the muzzle end and take the rod out. We had a gun failure at the breech end.
Uh-huh.
We never had it apart from new, cleaned it from the other end, and when we fired it, the threads pulled out of the barrel, and the gun came apart in 3 pieces.
No kidding. So,
Now we have 2 guns, so just as a precaution, I tore the other gun apart. That one was about to fail too.
were the threads deteriorated?
The threads pulled right out of the barrel.
Was it because they were rusted or what?
No, it was
New Sherman roll.
old.
Yeah, but you could never get out far from it.
We never took it apart. We always took the breather, the muzzle end out and cleaned it from the muzzle end.
Okay.
And once I did tear the other one apart, portions of the thread were on the breech. As I screwed it out, the breech, even in the gun that flew apart, the breech was fine, the threads
Yeah.
were fine, but the barrel failed. I called our parts supplier, they contacted Shermer, and they said, well, it's not a new gun, it's not under warranty.
Interesting. So what came out, was this end for you?
No, the barrel came off, the bolt flew,
So it broke here?
it broke right there, yeah.
Okay, I got you. And you had not opened this part?
We had not taken that apart.
Okay, so,
There was really, we didn't see any need to take it apart.
Yeah.
Now we take it apart once in a while for inspection.
that's probably a good idea, because I think that if you think about that, you've got the mating surface there between 2 metals, right? And so over time, moisture can creep into that space.
Well, this one wasn't corroded or anything like that when it come apart.
They
It was
just failed.
The threads failed. It pulled.
That's really concerning.
Well, it's very concerning when it happened.
That's a safety